Hi, I'm Jeanette Roche. This is Bridge City News. Here are some of the top stories we've been following. 6 candidates running for MP in the Lethbridge riding go head-to-head in their first local debate Tuesday evening. Plus, Mark Carney rolls his campaign into Calgary today, while Pierre Poilievre leaves Edmonton and heads back east to defend his 3 strikes law. And stock markets soar again today following Donald Trump's 90-day pause on tariffs.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Jeanette Roche.
Thanks so much for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump has paused tariffs on most nations for 90 days. Trump announced both a pause and a lower 10% reciprocal tariff in an online post after days of market turmoil triggered by his trade war with the world. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirms Canada and Mexico are included in that 10% universal levy. Trump also raised his tax rate on Chinese imports to 125% effective immediately. China is promising to fight to the end in a growing trade war with the U.S. It announced tariffs would be raised on American goods by 84% starting a Thursday. Secretary Bessent had this to say about Trump's decision to pause the tariffs.
And we saw the successful negotiating strategy that President Trump implemented a week ago today. It has brought more than 75 countries forward to negotiate. It took great courage for him to stay the course until this moment. And what we have ended up with here, as I told everyone a week ago, they're in this very spot, do not retaliate and you will be rewarded. So every country in the world who wants to come and negotiate, we are willing to hear you. We're going to go down to a 10% baseline tariff for them, and China will be raised to 125 due to their insistence on escalation.
The countdown to the federal election is mere weeks away, and here in Lethbridge and area, the public got to witness all 6 candidates in their riding participate in a forum hosted by the Chamber of Commerce. The hot-button topics throughout the night included coal mining, the tariff response, and affordability, all of which drew reactions from the audience. BCN's Landon Hickok has more on what was debated.
The Yates Memorial Theater was packed Tuesday night with people eager to hear the thoughts and priorities of 6 candidates gunning for the role as Lethbridge Member of Parliament. Each candidate was subject to questions from a panel from local media and members from the audience. Incumbent Conservative MP Rachel Thomas and Liberal Chris Spearman took up much of the questions as the crowd responded to their proposals and rebuttals with cheers and even some groans.
And that's not because of Trump's tariffs, that's because of Liberal mismanagement.
Other candidates, including the People's Party of Canada's Clara Petillo, New Democrat Party's Nathan Svoboda, Green Party's Amber Murray, and Christian Heritage Party's Mark Slingerland each provided their stances on how they would best represent Lethbridge and confront top national issues.
I think the great thing about forums is it allows people to see the diversity of views that are available in Canada, to have them shared respectfully, and to look for points of commonality.
So many of our candidates have shared values across the political spectrum that there's so much we agree on.
Well, I think a forum is always a great opportunity to connect with voters and to be able to share, my perspective on different things as the local representative here in Lethbridge, as well as our platform as the Conservative Party of Canada. And so I had the opportunity to do that here tonight, and I felt that it was widely received by the audience in attendance.
Well, I liked the fact that it was very collegial and people were very engaged, and I thought respectful of all candidates.
Much attention was given to the issue of coal mining, which scientists and experts show widespread concerns that it would have on waterways in southern Alberta. Most of the candidates throughout the night at some point expressed their thoughts on the issue.
My main takeaway is how concerned everyone is about our water supply, and rightly so. I believe that protecting our water supply is of utmost importance, and I certainly do agree with Amber's policies surrounding creating ecotourism on the eastern slope.
Potable water for people, for animals, and for use on crops is absolutely essential. And so anything that would threaten that needs to be taken seriously. We also have to be really honest that this is a provincial matter. It is with the province. And so where the federal government and the province can work together, of course, let's do that. But ultimately, let's put it on the shoulders of who's responsible, and ultimately that's the province of Alberta.
2 more forums are scheduled for next week, on Monday hosted by the Coaldale Chamber of Commerce, and next Wednesday hosted by the Lethbridge Public Library. Advance voting begins on April the 18th for the federal election, and main voting day is on the 28th. For Bridge City News, I'm Landon Hickok.
Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre insists that his promised 3 strikes law does not run afoul of Canada's Constitution. That's despite several justice experts saying the new laws might get struck down by the courts. Poilievre left Edmonton and campaigned in Ontario today, where he repeated his promise that his party would make criminals ineligible for bail, probation, parole, or house arrest if they're convicted of serious offenses 3 times.
And they will serve a minimum of 10 years behind bars, a maximum of life imprisonment, and they will have to earn their release even still. We will designate such offenders as dangerous offenders, meaning they cannot be released until they have proven that they are no longer a danger to society. Under my watch, the only way for repeat offenders to obtain their freedom will be through spotless behavior and clean drug tests during a lengthy minimum prison sentence with earned release dependent on making real progress in improving their lives, such as learning a trade or upgrading their education.
Liberal leader Mark Carney rolled his campaign into Calgary today, flanked by unionized iron workers. Carney announced a plan to get energy projects built.
My Liberal government will establish a major federal project office with a clear mandate. Issue a decision after a single review on a project within 2 years instead of 5. And we will do this. We will do this in a way without compromising our world-leading environmental standards or our constitutional and moral obligations to Indigenous peoples. This is an ambitious but attainable goal.
Carney also announced what he called the First and Last Mile Fund, which he says would connect the extraction of rare earth minerals to the supply chain, getting them to market more efficiently. Carney's next campaign stop will be in Saskatchewan. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh made a policy announcement in Vancouver today. Singh wants to see an expansion of the National Pharmacare Plan to include all essential medications.
Well, we've laid out the steps to achieve it. So the first phase, what we want to see happen is the essential medication, and the cost for that is about $3.5 billion. This is an investment in our healthcare. Every other country in the world that has universal healthcare has included medication coverage because they figured out it doesn't actually make sense that people can go into a physician, get prescribed medication to keep them healthy or to cure an illness, and they simply can't afford it. It is a bad way to run a healthcare system. And so we really believe fundamentally everyone deserves access to medication. This is something fundamental. We've passed the legislation, the framework for it, and we want to see it continue. I'm concerned, I think Canadians are worried when they hear Mark Carney talk about stopping it, not continuing it, not moving forward with it. They're worried about that because they want to see more medication covered. If that's you, vote for New Democrats and we'll get it done.
Singh will also head to Saskatchewan. Affordability has been a hot topic for Canadians for a while now, and with the federal election around the corner, candidates are getting their messages out on how their party would tackle the problem. Jocelyn Johnson is the NDP candidate for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner, and she says federal funding is needed to help get affordability under control.
We've seen federal investments in things like housing and healthcare and post-secondary really over the decades just sort of fall off a cliff compared to where it used to be. So we need to restabilize some of those key planks of federal funding for our communities because really the biggest difficulty is predictability in funding. You can't think long term and you can't plan long term if you don't know what's going to be funded year to year.
Catch my full interview with NDP candidate Jocelyn Johnson coming up after Business News. Well, the Airline Pilots Association of Canada is expressing its concern about a plan to hire foreign pilots through the Temporary Foreign Worker Program. Karen Kenny, WestJet Encore Master Executive Chair, says the measure, which seeks to bring foreign pilots to WestJet, was approved by the Government of Canada without consulting the union. Kenny says the solution would be to attract Canadian pilots with better salaries and schedules.
There are Canadian pilots that are around and are willing to work, for WestJet. The problem is that there's an issue at, WestJet Encore that there's no career progression. So if you don't fix that, it's never going to stop. So putting a temporary foreign worker at Encore isn't going to fix the issue of why people aren't staying. And as of right now, I understand it's between 20 and 60 pilots to fill their captain positions. South Africa, they're looking at India, they're looking at countries with higher, training qualifications. What we want from the government is to basically consult the unions first on the issues that affect, because, it affects our collective bargaining. There could be solutions before going down these routes of attracting Canadian pilots. The biggest thing as well, we're asking for a robust consultation period for the impacted stakeholders before getting the approval to hire temporary foreign workers.
Kenny says WestJet Canada has around 3,000 pilots combined between WestJet and WestJet Encore. Democratic lawmakers in the U.S. held a press conference today in Washington demanding the return of a man who was deported to El Salvador, a deportation the White House now admits was an administrative error. On March 12th, Kilmar Abrego Garcia was driving home with his young son in Maryland when he was stopped by agents from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. According to a federal judge, after 3 days without any legal process or a hearing, Mr. Garcia was returned to his native El Salvador, where he is now in a prison known for housing gang members. His wife says this incident has destroyed her family's happiness and her children's innocence.
Kilmar, if you can hear me, I'm still fighting for you. Your brother, your mother, our children are still fighting for you. We're not going to give up hope.
A Maryland court has ordered Garcia to be returned to the United States, but the Trump administration officials say that they can't compel El Salvador to return Mr. Garcia. In local news, Lethbridge police have charged 5 people with drug and weapons offenses following a short-term investigation into a problem property on the south side. At the end of March, police initiated a drug trafficking investigation following reports of suspicious activity at a home along the 1000 block of 12th Street South that led to several complaints about open drug use and property crime in the area. On Monday, police executed a search warrant that led to the seizure of weapons, drugs, drug trafficking paraphernalia, and stolen property, including a high-end bike worth over $5,000. A man and woman were arrested on outstanding warrants. 12 others were located inside the property and taken into custody. The 5 people charged are all from Lethbridge, with the other 9 being released from custody without any charges. Also on Monday, following an early morning routine traffic stop, Lethbridge police charged a 35-year-old Adam Richard Filippic of Clare's home and 34-year-old Carrie Lynn Greebley of Brockett with drug offenses and stolen property. During a search, police seized 200 doses of fentanyl, 620 doses of methamphetamine, and more than 130 narcotic pills, about $1,000 in cash believed to be proceeds of crime, and also recovered a stolen e-bike. Both were released from custody and are scheduled to appear in court on April the 17th and May the 1st, respectively. Well, Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services responded to a structure fire Tuesday at a home in the city's south side. Acting Platoon Chief Captain Brant Shelton says the incident occurred at about 3:30 in the afternoon in the 1300 block of 14th Avenue South. Shelton says the The smoke and fire caught the attention of neighbors who called 911. He also said the fire started in a shed and spread to a shed in the next door neighbor's yard as well.
The 2 sheds are gone, but we did manage to preserve the garage right next to the shed next door and the garage on the involved property. The wind is a mild factor today. We definitely had to be mindful of the structures downwind. Our biggest challenge today was the power pole that was involved in the back alley posed a significant risk to firefighters and the public in the alley. City Electric came very quickly. We did get a quick knockdown on the 2 structures in the 2 backyards. Once that was knocked down to a safe place, City Electric came in and is working on replacing and repairing the power as we speak.
The chief said no injuries were reported and the cause is under investigation. A Canadian scientist has won a breakthrough prize for discovery of the hormone used in diabetes and weight loss drugs. Dr. Daniel Drucker of the University of Toronto is sharing a $3 million life sciences prize with 4 international colleagues for discovering and developing the GLP-1 hormone used in now famous diabetes and weight loss drugs Ozempic, Wegovy, and Mounjaro.
It's about 40 years now since we have been doing GLP-1 research, and so those were the original discoveries, probably 1985. The experiments were done literally 40 years ago, and it does take time for basic science to often have its ultimate impact in transforming human endeavors. And this is just a great example of the importance of investing in basic science. None of us could have really predicted the impact we're seeing today, but it started with basic science.
Drucker and the other honorees received the award at the ceremony in Los Angeles on April 5th. The Toronto Blue Jays confirmed they're locking up slugger Vladimir Guerrero Jr. to a 14-year extension. The deal is worth $500 million U.S. The extension begins next season and is the largest contract in team history. Guerrero is a 4-time All-Star and has been a consistent offensive anchor for the team since making his big league debut with the Blue Jays in 2019. Congratulations to him. Well, south of the border, a truck driver is lucky to be alive and only suffering minor injuries after colliding with a train. Check out this dramatic footage. So dash cam video captured what could have been a horrific crash between a grain truck and a freight train near Sleepy Eye, Minnesota on April the 4th. Watch as the semi-truck makes a right turn onto the other highway there, which crosses over the train track. That happens to have a freight train barreling right towards it and then right through it. Oh, there it goes right there. It appears that the driver did not see the train, even though they would have had to pass it on their right-hand side of the highway before making that turn to cross the trains and the train track there. And ouch, the truck driver and 2 train occupants were treated at the scene for minor injuries, if you can believe that. And if that truck had been just a little bit slower, that story could have had a much more tragic ending. Oh my goodness. Well, something else that's not a tragedy is this weather. The past couple of days have been mighty nice, seeing our daytime highs exceed the average high for this time of year. I will be right back with the full weather forecast right after this. Welcome back. Now, if you live in the Lethbridge area, you are no stranger to our strong winds, and today was certainly no exception. We saw gusts at 30 to 50 to 70 kilometers per hour, but look at that temperature, high of 14 degrees, much higher than average. We did not really see those showers we were expecting to remain mainly sunny, and that sunshine lasting into tomorrow, Thursday, and look at that temperature, high of 20 degrees, seeing a high of 17 on Friday, and then Saturday, mainly cloudy skies down to 12 degrees, sitting at 10 on Sunday, and then all the way up to 16 Monday, and then 23 degrees for next Tuesday with clear skies. So I'm loving it because we're well above average, which is 12 degrees. Average low for this time of year is -1. 24 was the record temperature on this day that happened back in 1996, and in 1922, Lethbridge saw its record low, which was -13 on this day. Sun rose this morning at 6:52 a.m. and our sun set this evening at 8:15, looking at 13 hours, 23 minutes of day sunny light. That was 13:23. That is a lot of sunlight, and it's going to just keep getting longer and longer the days. Okay, so we've got some periods of rain happening in Victoria tomorrow, high of 14. Same with Vancouver, 14, and rain. And we got 17 in Edmonton, 18 in Calgary tomorrow with beautiful sunny skies across Alberta. Same thing for most of the rest of the prairies. As we look into Saskatchewan, we're going to see mainly clear skies, lots of sunshine. Definitely wear your sunglasses if you are in the prairies tomorrow. High of 14 in, actually we have a pair of 14s here, Saskatoon and Regina. 9 degrees for the expected high tomorrow in Winnipeg, looking at clouds and then clearing later on in the day. Toronto, really the only one that we have to be concerned here, not so much concerned, but we are seeing some precipitation there. So we've got periods of snowfall changing to rainfall in the afternoon, high of 5. Then we've got 6 degrees in Ottawa, mix of sun and cloud. Clear skies expected tomorrow in Montreal with a high of 8. Looking to Atlantic Canada now, also seeing mainly clear skies, beautiful sunshine. Fredericton, high 7. 5 for the high in Halifax. Same thing for Charlottetown, high of 5 degrees. 40% chance of showers expected tomorrow in St. John's with 30 to 50K winds, high of 5 degrees there. So there you have it. That is your forecast. A new report says the national average asking rent in March was just over $2,100, marking the 6th straight month of year-over-year declines. The monthly data provided by rentals.ca and Urbanation says rents were down 2.8% last month compared with March of 2024. Urbanation President Sean Hildebrand said renters were more active in March than they'd been in recent months, likely thanks to improvements in affordability. Ontario recorded the steepest rent declines, while Saskatchewan led the way for year-over-year rent growth. A Chinese billionaire in British Columbia has taken to social media to announce her plans to buy dozens of Hudson's Bay locations after seeing, quote, Canadians feeling sad over the collapse of the retail giant. Entrepreneur Wei Hung Leo says she wants to restore the Bay to its glory. Leo is the board chairwoman of Central Walk, a retail investment company that owns 3 shopping centers in BC. Retail insider analyst Craig Patterson suggests the move will be an uphill battle for Leo and says, quote, it could just be somebody wanting good social media attention. And with that, here is today's markets.
The TSX was up 1,220 points on the day to finish at 23,727. The Dow was up 2,962 points to 40,608. The S&P 500 was up 474 points to 5,456. The Nasdaq was up 1,857 points to 17,124. West Texas Intermediate oil was up $3.11 to $62.69 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 27 cents to $3.73. Gold was up 104 to $30.8274 US an ounce, and silver was up 143 to $31.02 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.71 per bushel. Barley is at $6.75. Canola is at $14.66. And corn is at $8.13 per bushel. Live cattle were up $3.70 to $202.80. Feeder cattle were up $3.32 to $283.75, and lean hogs were down 85 cents to $86.97. And the Canadian dollar was down over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 71 cents US.
Recapping one of our top stories, U.S. President Donald Trump has paused tariffs on most nations for 90 days. Trump announced both a pause and a lower 10% reciprocal tariff in an online post after days of market turmoil triggered by his trade war with the world. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent confirms Canada and Mexico are included in that 10% universal levy. Trump also raised his tax on Chinese imports to 125%, effective immediately. Well, affordability is a hot topic for Canadians. An NDP candidate for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner, Jocelyn Johnson, gives her thoughts on what is needed to help get affordability under control. That is coming up next. Also, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. You can also visit our website or our YouTube page anytime to check out more of our stories and interviews. The 2025 federal election is quickly approaching, and today we have the opportunity to discuss the issues with the Medicine Hat Cardston Warner NDP candidate, Jocelyn Johnson. Jocelyn, welcome to Bridge City News. Great to have you on today.
Morning.
Can you, Jocelyn, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and why you decided to throw your hat into the election, the federal election ring? And it sounds like this is not the first time you have done this either.
That's right. I did run in the federal election in the last one in Medicine Hat Cardston Warner as well. So this is my second time as a candidate in this area. And in terms of why I've put my name forward, I'm hearing, I grew up in Medicine Hat. I spent most of my life there. Really feel at home there in Medicine Hat. And so the community is very important to me. I also did live in Crow's Nest Pass for some time. And I think just hearing over and over from people that they want more choice, they want another option. I've always had a bit of a fire in my belly to do good, and that's played out in a number of different ways, working sort of behind the scenes in politics at all three different levels of government. So I do have some public policy experience, and then also working just on behalf of workers. So that's been a big part of my career. Aside from social work, it's been really just sort of a servant leadership, labor of love, just trying to be out there doing good in the world. And so this is just another iteration of that in my mind. And I come from a farming background. My parents both grew up in farming communities, on one side near Sedalia, on the other in Acadia Valley. And so to me, embracing New Democrat values and being a candidate for the NDP is just, it's very synonymous with how I grew up. You help your neighbor, you work hard, you do right by people, you play fair, and you invest wisely. And so, when I had the opportunity to be on the ballot and champion some of those same values, it really wasn't a big question for me.
Yeah, well, this time around is quite a bit different. So much of this election has been focused on how to stand up to the U.S. and tariffs, a very different issue than last time you ran. But what do you see as the best approach to deal with this?
I think we absolutely need leadership that in every way does not mimic or condone Donald Trump, the president of the United States, is a threat to livelihoods, to jobs, to our economy as we know it, and it's a crisis. And any way that we can prepare and react to that, in terms of our infrastructure, our supply chains, our economic stability, we're going to need to invest like we've never invested before in people and communities. And we need to put those elbows right up and keep them up, not just for speeches and things like that, but in the way that we govern. So the way that we do procurement, the way that we support workers. Government's role is to collectivize risk and maximize reward, and we need our government to step up and do that right now.
People in southern Alberta and across Canada are saying that one of the most important election issues is that of affordability. So that includes affordable housing. Many are finding it difficult to afford to buy a house or even pay the rent. So what's your plan to make those costs more affordable in southern Alberta?
Yeah, that is a top issue. Wages are stagnant and costs are going up, and that's just not realistic to be able to do what you need to do as a family to raise kids, to put food on the table. So there are a number of ways that government can deal with that. We've seen federal investments in things like housing and healthcare and post-secondary really over the decades just sort of fall off a cliff compared to where it used to be. So we need to restabilize some of those key planks of federal funding for our communities, because really the biggest difficulty is predictability in funding. You can't think long-term and you can't plan long-term if you don't know what's going to be funded year to year. So renormalizing some of those federal injections into some of those key programs like housing are really core to our communities being able to build around meeting the needs of people that live community to community, whether it's rural or in the city proper. We need affordable housing everywhere, and that means the ability for families to buy homes, starter homes, or seniors to be able to retire and still afford their property taxes living in their homes. And then also with rentals, we've seen rents jump and move dramatically that are just out of step with what families can afford.
So you have a house building plan. I know that the leader of the NDP, that's kind of his plan too. So how would this house building plan be funded? Where would the money come from?
There needs to be partnerships. It's one thing to sort of inject money. That's step one often. But working in partnership with local municipalities to look at ways to reduce the friction between not-for-profits wanting to build supportive housing and folks that are in the development industry, being able to work with them to unlock either federal crown land through obviously a process required for consultation and things like that are required, but there are ways that we can reduce friction to speed those things up and to make sure that partnership is in lockstep so that we're not holding up progress unnecessarily.
Polls are always interesting during election time, and we've got election polls right now seeing that the NDP is sitting somewhere between 7 and 11%, which is far below where they were in the last election. So what do you think needs to happen to turn that around and win over voters who seem to be moving to the Liberals?
Yeah, I think it's, just to be frank, I think people are scared. People are scared of what this tariff, these threats mean to our country. They're scared of what that means for their family, our local community, and I think people are afraid that if we elect conservatives across our country and we end up with a conservative government, we're going to have Trump light. And I think there's a real fear that's moving people away to look at the alternative. And so we do have, a new leader with the Liberals. That's always an exciting time for a party to be able to sort of ride the wave of that new leadership. But as a New Democrat, we've seen Liberals and conservatives govern our country since the beginning of time. And it's just two sides of the same coin. So we've always had the New Democrats play the role of a negotiator, getting the job done when negotiation is needed to sort of level out the different extremes that can sometimes happen in politics. And the NDP has often played that role of broker to just really get things done for Canadians and for their communities. So regardless of how this federal election does turn out, we need the New Democrats. We've always needed the New Democrats to sort of play that role of keeping accountability and making sure that people are really the center of the decision making, because sometimes the politics can really get away from what elections are really about, and they're about people. And so running for the New Democrats is sometimes an uphill battle, but you do it because it's really about people, and it's about giving people the strong voice that they need, and whatever that looks like federally on the national scale. I can tell you that if there are more New Democrats at that table, more things are going to get done for Canadians.
Now, Jocelyn, on the environmental front, many Southern Albertans are still feeling the impact of the carbon tax, of course. So what are NDP's plans to protect the environment without putting a hit on the economy?
Yeah, and it's interesting that there's the consumer carbon tax, which obviously is meant to incentivize consumer change, but it's not always realistic. Some industries are just not able to pivot. Farming, agriculture, very heavy hit to some of those industries and some of those livelihoods, and so obviously that's a problem. And particularly in rural areas, it's just not feasible to drive an electric vehicle from one city to another. Or, this is Alberta. We know people need to drive vehicles, and so that it's just not feasible. Sometimes there's this gap between, the intention and then the result. And so, whatever policies are realistic and actually going to get outcomes. We have to get away from ideology. We have to get down to what's actually going to work. Everybody cares about clean air. Everybody cares about clean water. Everybody wants that, but they need to trust that the process is really going to work. It's really going to have results, and it's not going to unfairly impact families at a time when cost of living is high and wages are not keeping up. So there are ways to do that. There is a heavy emitter price that I believe needs to stay. Otherwise, you're going to have, sort of a race to the bottom between provinces where if one gets rid of it, industry might be incentivized to shift. And it's, we need a national strategy on climate, on environmental regulation that doesn't create disincentives for the investment that we need, but also doesn't unnecessarily impact Canadians in terms of their pocketbook.
Yeah, and with that in mind, and speaking of the environment there, so does the NDP want to keep oil and gas in the ground as much as possible for environmental reasons?
Not at all. Not at all. I think we can't paint our industries with all the same brush. There are many industrial players that are doing a great job innovating, really considering where our future's going in terms of consumer need, but balanced with an ability to keep our environment clean and safe for us to continue to have for many generations. So I think it's about partnership, and I think it's about, again, policies that actually get results, not just sound good or look good on paper. And there are many, industrial players that are doing really good work. They really are creating a lot of innovation, and we have to continue to incentivize that good behavior.
And of course, you being from Gas City, right, Medicine Hat, you would understand how much that industry impacts jobs in your riding particularly, which is so rich in natural gas resources, and that of course creates employment.
Absolutely. I've got family that's been working in oil and gas. I think we all either have worked in it, know someone who works in it, or related to someone who works in oil and gas. It's a huge part of our economy, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. And so it's really about partnering. It's really about tangible goals that can be met and within certain timelines. There has been a pipeline built to the west recently that happened because of a partnership with the Alberta NDP and the federal government. So, there's certainly nothing saying that one industry is better than another. It's really about meeting the combined goals of making sure that families have the ability to earn a livelihood, and that we're utilizing our resources wisely, and making sure that we've got a sustainable environmental conditions in our communities for years to come for our kids. We all care about our families' health and well-being, so I don't think those things need to be necessarily one or the other.
Speaking of health and well-being there, Jocelyn, healthcare, always an election topic. So what are the NDP's plans to improve healthcare and to attract and retain more healthcare professionals?
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great question. I'm hearing constantly from people across the community concern about emergency services, healthcare services. We've seen hospital shutdowns. We've seen clinics moving. We've seen family doctors retiring early, leaving the community. Our healthcare is not in a good state, and it's not going to get better with constant shuffling around and uncertainty for the staff that we need. And we need to get back to normalizing the federal government's role in healthcare transfers. So those transfers to provinces, to make sure that Canadians across the country have equitable access to healthcare. And so, of course, it is a provincial issue in terms of the delivery. The federal government plays a huge role in funding. But they can also set the terms in terms of, every time we see a move to privatize our healthcare, it creates higher costs. It creates out-of-pocket costs. We don't need profit lines in healthcare, and so I think our federal government can do a lot more to keep sustainable, predictable funding up for those services, but also set the terms to say, we don't need duplication. We need one healthcare delivery model, and it needs to be public, and it needs to be universally publicly funded and delivered.
Mm-hmm. And homelessness and addictions continue to be an issue as well, not to mention the opioid epidemic, but especially with the affordability problems that we have right now. So what's the best approach to bring about change in this area?
I think anytime you have people who are stressed financially, and you know, there's a lot to worry about in terms of you know, anxiety in our communities, and that's not necessarily unpredictable. You know, we have not planned well for the mental health supports that people need. You know, and again, these things are all related. So I'll give you a quick anecdote. I was at a restaurant, and a server, when I was paying, he said, are you with the NDP?" And I said, Yeah." And he said, "I just want to say," he said, "I've never," and this is the, you know, he was talking about the provincial NDP, but he said, "I just want to say, when the NDP raised the minimum wage, it changed my life. It made it so that I could work less shifts and I could get the time off I need to go to my mental health appointments. And then I was able to afford the medication I need. And I was able to really stabilize myself in my life. And then I was able to take on more shifts and save more money. And now I'm registered in post-secondary." And this person was in tears. And I thought, this is why we do these things. This is why wages need to keep up. This is why services need to keep up. This is why the mental health support, the pharmacare needs to be there at those pivotal points in people's lives where they can make those connection points and they can unlock potential. Because if you hold people back and create that friction, it becomes really, really difficult for people to get ahead.
Jocelyn, thanks so much for being with us today. Appreciate having you on.
Thank you so much for your time.
Jocelyn Johnson is the federal NDP candidate for the Medicine Hat Cardston Warner riding.
The federal election continues with candidates jousting over how to deal with tariffs and how to make life more affordable. Now, indeed, these are important things, but which issues would be priority for Jesus? Should voters perhaps make some of the moral issues priority? And to what degree should Christians get involved in this election? Joining us to discuss this is Mike Schutten. He is the executive director of ARPA Canada, which stands for Association for Reformed Political Action. Mike, it's great to have you with us.
It's good to be here.
Now, Mike, I know that politicians aren't the answer to all of our problems. As Christians, we believe that God has the answers. However, God does seem to like doing things together with his children, including bring about positive change. To what degree and how should Christians get involved in a federal election?
Oh, I think there's many, many different ways in which Christians can get involved. Through the work of ARPA Canada, we're very much encouraging all of our supporters to get involved by certainly at the very least just highlighting some of the important issues facing Canadians and certainly issues that will have to be grappled with by our next government. But I think even more importantly, we're just really encouraging everyone to recognize that God has placed governments over us, Romans 13, for our good. It's our duty to respect and submit to them, but it's also our duty to be a salt and a light to them. And during an election campaign is prime time for that.
What would you say to viewers who may argue, you know what, my vote probably won't make a difference anyways?
Yeah, it's an interesting response. You do hear that from not just Christians, from neighbors, colleagues at work, etc. People will hear that. I think it almost assumes that unless your vote is the deciding vote in an election, like in a riding or a general election, then it doesn't matter. And quite frankly, I think that's a bit minimizing of the importance of our having our say in this constitutional democracy. In Canada, we are able to and have influence on who is going to govern us, and elections matter because it matters who is going to be the next government. There's two parties at the helm here in Canada, two main parties that will take Canada in very different directions depending on who's called upon to lead. So our votes do matter.
So let's talk about which issues would be priority for Jesus, because I know you believe that he would be concerned about MAID, which is medical assistance in dying. And we notice your ARPA website has an article noting that the United Nations Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities released its report on Canada on March the 21st. The committee recommends that Canada repeal Track 2 MAID and also refuse to expand MAID any further. Can you explain why Track 2 MAID is so problematic?
I think from ARPA's perspective, I would submit that all of euthanasia is problematic. Euthanasia is the intentional killing, the intentional taking away of someone's life, and that is problematic for ARPA Canada, and I would say for Jesus, for God's word. God's word speaks clearly to the value of life, our intrinsic value, not our extrinsic value. So I think that, but to the report that you just referenced is very providential. I would say that came out just a week prior to the election being called, and it shows to not just Canadians but to the rest of the world how out of line our country is when it comes to the rapid expansion of euthanasia in Canada. So what that report is calling for is certainly no further expansions, but it's also calling for, like you correctly asserted, a repeal back to a Track 1 only provision for euthanasia in our country. Now, Track 1 is what was initially legalized back in 2016 when our government legalized euthanasia. And what that means is essentially, to very quick summary, people whose deaths was reasonably foreseeable, so people with terminal illness who are in the very latter stages of their life, they could request and receive euthanasia, and they could receive it very quickly to deal with that intense suffering that might occur at the very end of their life. In 2021, our government, in response to a court decision, they expanded that further and created a second track. Now, people who apply under that second track, so for example, and some of your viewers might recognize this, veterans who are dealing with PTSD, people who are homeless and can't afford shelter, sometimes people who just simply can't afford medication to deal with the pain and suffering that they're going through, they can apply for euthanasia, for medical assistance in dying as well, but they're put onto Track 2, and in Track 2, there's a 90-day waiting period. So the intention behind that is that the circumstances by which they requested euthanasia, they might change during those 90 days and give them a chance to change their mind. So that's the Track 2. Now, where this particularly impacts Canadians is people with disabilities. People who are living with disability are able to apply for Track 2 MAID and are receiving it in our country. And the United Nations Committee that you referenced, it's very, very concerned with the reality that in Canada, able-bodied Canadians are protected by the law. So if they're suicidal, they get suicide prevention. But if a disabled person expresses a desire to end their life, they get suicide assistance, not suicide prevention. And they've identified that, I think, properly. That's very much in line with where ARPA Canada is at. We think a realistic first step for whoever forms the next government of Canada ought to be to roll things back to that, at least to that Track 1 provision only.
Now, abortion is the one issue that none of the major parties like to talk about, with the exception of the Liberal Party, which has a track record of bringing it up as a wedge issue, which they believe infringes on, quote, reproductive rights, as they like to frame it. Now, ironically, abortion sometimes infringes on the reproductive rights of men, but you believe abortion is actually a very real election issue. Can you explain why?
Yeah, I think that it has been ever since 1988, when Canada's Supreme Court struck down the abortion laws in our country. Since that time, we have had no legal framework whatsoever for abortion. And that results in the latest numbers from 2023 provided by the Canadian Institute for Health Information show that those numbers are the highest they've been in the past 8 years, over 100,000 abortions in our country. And this is something that is, like you said, the Liberals like to use as a wedge issue. They clearly, their ideology dictates that they believe a woman can only be equal with a man if she has the right to abortion for any reason at any stage of her pregnancy. Conservatives, on the other hand, equally as frustrating, continue to just view preborn children as a political liability and refuse to entertain discussions about protecting them, even at the latter stages of pregnancy, even in the cases of sex-selective abortion. So that's very frustrating. And I think that from ARPA Canada's perspective, we just want to highlight how as a country, it becomes increasingly challenging to expect God's blessing when we allow for the legal killing of 100,000 plus preborn children every single year. So we think that the time is now. Any time is a good time to begin protecting those preborn children. And we're going to continue advocating on their behalf because, as you and your viewers know, preborn children can't advocate on their own behalf.
So is there anything viewers can do to bring the abortion issue to politicians and voters to get their attention as to how significant this issue is?
Yeah, so that's a great question. ARPA Canada has a special web page devoted to this election, and we highlight 5 issues there, of which euthanasia and abortion are 2 of them. And we're really encouraging people to understand that most of what we're hearing from the mainstream media, from the candidates, from the party leaders, is going to be things like what you started this broadcast off with, talking with tariffs, about Trump, about the economy. And I'm not saying those aren't important issues, but the reality is abortion, preborn human rights, euthanasia, those things are not going to be brought up unless we bring them up from a grassroots perspective. So we have on that webpage very focused questions that we're encouraging people to ask, whether it's candidates who come to your door, show up at a town hall and ask these questions. But we believe that candidates need to be asked, if elected, what are you going to do to change the status quo on abortion? Allowing 100,000 preborn children to die every single year in our country is not something that we can continue doing. On the euthanasia side, very same thing. If elected, what are you going to do to acknowledge that UN report and roll us back to a track 1 only system?
So you would agree that this is very much a grassroots initiative. We need to start from the ground up. You're talking about politicians knocking on your doors, but we would also need to influence and educate our neighbors and coworkers on where life begins as well, then, wouldn't we?
Very much so. So I would encourage people who are watching this broadcast to, when you go to work tomorrow, when you talk to your neighbors, ask them, say, hey, what do you think about this reality? And how can we make a difference? Plunk a sign in your lawn, put something on your car, go to that web page and use those questions it's up to us to bring this issue into the election narrative. And it's during election time when people are paying the most attention to some of these issues. And that now's the time when we have to highlight these ongoing tragedies in our country.
Now, you say that pornography and access to this by minors is something that Parliament should be addressing. I haven't heard anything on this so far from any party leaders. So what would you like to see Parliament do on this with our next government?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. Pornography is an epidemic in our country. It's impacting so many people's relationships. And the tragedy is that it's available to children as young as 8, 9, 10 years old. So what ARPA Canada is asking for from the next government is to, at the very least, put in age verification programs, pass laws that ensure that if children go to a site, they have to verify their age. There's checks and balances put in. The UK and other jurisdictions have gone this route, and it's time for Canada to as well. Twice in the past number of years, this issue has been brought up both in the Senate, Canadian Senate, and in the House of Commons by the opposition, as well as the government. The Liberal government during its last term also recognized the need to do something when it comes to the ubiquitousness of pornography and the fact that minors are able to access it. That was buried in one of their other larger bills, and that bill unfortunately died on the order paper when the election was called. But we certainly don't want them to forget about that, whoever is going to form the next government, that they need to take action to protect minors from the access to pornography.
And how would that age verification work other than like just clicking on a button that says, I'm an adult?
Yeah, I don't know the exact ins and outs of how it would work, but we do know that other jurisdictions have put this into place. Often when we have these conversations, a lot of the opposition comes from people who are in favor of freedom, the freedom for people to access whatever they want. But I think society at large, public opinion is shifting. They're recognizing that this does have dire consequences for children, and we need to take some action. So I would implore whoever becomes the next government in our country to do that, to take action.
One other thing, gender identity is an ongoing issue in our nation, along with parental rights. Is there legislation you would like to see put in place to put some healthy boundaries in place to protect both children and parents?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, another good question. I think a lot of this, the policy changes that need to take place are going to have to be done at the provincial level. I think federally, where we're looking for from the next federal government is to reverse what's been called the conversion therapy ban in our country. So this very much impacts parental rights in the sense of ensuring that parents are not able to, unless they affirm their child's gender dysphoria and gender transition, they're unable to counsel, to bring them to counselors to get the professional help they need to deal with that gender dysphoria, essentially outlining what has often been called talk therapy in our country. This sends an incredible chill when that bill was passed on counselors, on pastors, on elders, and on parents. And so we're working with whoever's going to be the next government to ensure that that gets addressed so that we have maximum freedom and parents have maximum freedom to train their child in the way that he or she should go, as Proverbs says.
And one final question, because we're almost out of time. What about freedom of conscience for our medical professionals? Is there any changes you would like the next federal government to put in place when it comes to what our doctors can and cannot say?
Yeah, here again, there's a intersection between provincial legislation and federal, but certainly the federal government can take steps to ensure that freedom of conscience, a fundamental freedom in our country, is protected. And when we have jurisdictions here in British Columbia forcing essentially hospice facilities to facilitate MAID euthanasia, violating people's conscience left, right, and center. Ontario as well, mandatory referrals is something that's been passed in that country. That is not only impacting people and them having to violate their own conscience, but people who are unwilling to do that are exiting out of those healthcare systems. And everybody who's been following the healthcare debate in our country knows we need those people in our healthcare systems to care for those who need the care.
Mike Schutten is the Executive Director of ARPA Canada. Mike, thank you so much for your time today.
I really appreciate the discussion.
I'm Naveen Day on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.